and peace process. The people of Derry, the families of Bloody Sunday, and the people of Ireland share a strong allegiance with the people of Palestine and have done for many, many generations. So it is right and proper that as we watch the genocide unfolding and put it in the context of years of occupation and denial of national self-determination and of apartheid, that we stand today and always with the people of Palestine. It's right and proper that as Bloody Sunday Trust and the Bloody Sunday families and the wider people of this city, that we theme our work on one word, one struggle. It is right that we put our lessons and learnings around conflict transformation and standing up for equality and against injustice, that we use those lessons and learnings to shine a spotlight on the horrendous criminal genocide that has taken place as we speak. So we're very humbled and honoured that we have been joined in the city for a few days by Omar Barghouti. And we hope that we can extend the solidarity of this city, this people and this island to you today and for the rest of your time here. We do pride ourselves under the banner of one word, one struggle, and we will continue to shine that spotlight, to raise our voices, to do what we can do, and to learn from you about how best collectively we can challenge what we are witnessing on the streets and all our television screens currently. So tonight, we're delighted to have Omar to provide the annual lecture, chaired ably by author, broadcaster and journalist Susan Kay. So thank you, Susan, for agreeing to do that. So at this point, and in order to get proceedings underway, I would invite the Mayor of Derry City and Strabane Council, Councillor Patricia Lowe, to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming here tonight as we commemorate the 52nd anniversary of Bloody Sunday, and express my gratitude to the Bloody Sunday Trust for inviting me here to say a few words. I want to especially welcome the Bloody Sunday families who are in attendance tonight, and again pay tribute to your steadfast commitment to truth and justice. As a city, we know too well about injustice and the hand of oppression against our people by the state. And we know the power of people standing together to demand justice and to build peace. As we sit here tonight, over 26,000 people have been killed in Gaza as the Israeli military continue with its onslaught against the Palestinian people. Over 10,000 of those are children, sons and daughters who never got the chance to live their lives and have a future. We need to see an immediate ceasefire and an end to occupation of Gaza and the West Bank, and a genuine peace process in the Middle East now to deliver a viable, independent Palestine. Tonight, we have the privilege of hosting a prominent figure who has played a pivotal role in advocating for justice and equality for Palestine on the global stage. I am honoured to be in the presence of Omar Barghouti, the co-founder of Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, commonly known as BDS movement, and welcome him back to the city. Omar Barghouti is a tireless advocate for the rights of the Palestinian people and has dedicated his life to promoting non-violent resistance against injustice. He brings a unique perspective to the Palestinian struggle for self-determination. His academic background in philosophy and ethics, coupled with his commitment to human rights, has shaped his unwavering belief on power of grassroots movements to effect positive change in our society, much like the successful movement against apartheid in South Africa. The BDS movement, co-founded by Omar in 2005, and through his leadership, he has helped make BDS a formidable force in the pursuit of justice, garnering support from activists, scholars and artists worldwide. In recognising the struggles faced by the people of Derry on Bloody Sunday, we draw parallels on the ongoing struggles of the Palestinian people. It defines the term, one word, one struggle. They exemplify the resilience of communities in the face of oppression, and Barghouti's work aligns with the spirit of peaceful resistance against oppression by an occupying power. As we reflect on the lessons of Bloody Sunday and the enduring fight for justice, Omar Barghouti's presence reminds us that our struggles are interconnected. By engaging in dialogue with activists like Omar tonight, we broaden our understanding of global struggles for human rights and solidarity. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mayor. Normally, what we do at the annual lecture is we ask a young person, maybe not a young, so a young person, to read out the names of the 14 people who were killed on Bloody Sunday. But this year we thought that we would reverse that and read out the names of 14 young Palestinians who've been murdered over the last while. So I would ask Rory Kelly, whose great uncle was murdered on Bloody Sunday, to come forward and read out the names of 14 young Palestinians murdered. Thank you.
This year, we will read out the names of just 14 of the thousands of children murdered in Israel, murdered by Israel in Gaza, to symbolically represent all of those murdered during the start of this brutal attack. We will then have a minute's silence. Reem Al-Kalani, 12 years old. Reda Siam, 7 years old. Siraj Abu Jameh, 4 years old. Su'ela Abu Jameh, 10 years old. Basim Kawara, 10 years old. Saher Abu Namus, 4 years old. Amal Abuch, 2 years old. Ahmed Adal Ani Adu, 3 years old. Ziad Adal Ani Adu, 4 years old. Rakan Mohammed Ani Adu, 5 years old. Khaled Mohammed Jamil Al-Zanin, 7 years old. Shawan Amar Musa Al-Katani, 2 years old. Hala Hosni Fawat Tafish, 9 years old. Ahmad Nazir Shaki Shaban, 1 years old. If everyone would like to have that moment of silence now, please.
Can I ask Susan and Omar to join us now on the stage? Thank you.
so very moving to hear the names of those children, and certainly something that will really focus all of our minds here tonight as we wait to hear from Omar. Omar's talk is going to be called Israel, the Gaza Ghetto and the Ethical Obligation to End Complicity. Omar is one of the co-founders of Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions, as has already been mentioned, and that movement was set up in 2005. And BDS is a collective, and Omar speaks very modestly about his own role in it. He's an engineer by trade. He's actually voluntarily involved in BDS, and he was formerly a dance choreographer. So his work as a volunteer, I should say, he mentioned, involves days of at least 8 hours involvement, so it's a very, very serious commitment for him, and he travels all over the world when he's allowed by the Israeli authorities to do so. Omar lives between Galilee in Palestine and Amsterdam, where he's currently doing a PhD in ethical decolonisation. And his wife Safa is a Palestinian citizen of Israel, and they have 2 daughters who are both musicians. He's been attacked by the Israeli government ministers on many occasions, and directly and indirectly threatened. In 2016, an Israeli minister said of him, "Well, you will see what will happen to him soon." And he nonetheless continues to have the courage to travel all over the world, putting out the messages that he does about ethical and peaceful ways to combat oppression. He is modest, but I should say that he has, in 2017, he was awarded the Gandhi Peace Award, which has previously been won by people like Martin Luther King, Eleanor Roosevelt and Cesar Chavez. So he's a very, very distinguished speaker indeed, and I know that you're going to really enjoy listening to what he has to say tonight. I think everybody in Derry, as all over Ireland, is in a state of anguish about what we're witnessing at the moment in Gaza, and it's really, really good that this festival has invited someone to come and talk to us about very practical ways that we can actually help. And we'll be talking, after Omar gives his speech, we'll be talking about the various issues, such as, what people in Derry can do, what people in Ireland can do. But meanwhile, it's my very great pleasure to introduce Omar Barghouti.
Good evening. Thank you very much, Susan, for the introduction. I thank the Honourable Mayor for her own welcome presentation, and I join her in paying tribute to the victims of Bloody Sunday, the survivors of Bloody Sunday, and to every survivor of the ongoing conflict. Earlier today, the International Court of Justice ruled that Israel is plausibly committing genocide against 2.3 million Palestinians in the occupied and besieged Gaza Strip. This changes everything, or at least it should. This decision triggers a very clear legal responsibility for states to immediately end their complicity in Israel's regime of settler colonialism, apartheid, and military occupation. Now that the World Court has decided that South Africa's charge of genocide against Israel is plausible, it calls for ending the killing, injuring of Palestinians and for allowing humanitarian aid in. Now is the time to impose on the US-Israeli genocidal axis to actually stop the genocide. Since October 7th, Israel's indiscriminate bombing and criminal siege have led to the killing of and maiming of over 90,000 Palestinians, almost half of them children. Famine and infectious diseases are spreading as well due to Israel's deadly siege and scorched earth policy of mass destruction. According to UN human rights experts, all Gaza Palestinians are hungry by now, and over 500,000 are, quote, starving. In a new statement reiterating charges of genocide and domicide against Israel, UN experts have said it is unprecedented to make an entire civilian population go hungry this completely and quickly. Israel is destroying Gaza's food system and using food as a weapon against the Palestinian people. End of quote. Israel is not the only one on trial in The Hague. The entire legal system, dominated by hegemonic Western powers, is also on trial. As prominent international law scholar Mohsen Al-Attar puts it, quote, the ICJ faces a stark choice: find in favor of South Africa and indicate provisional measures, or damn international law into oblivion. He continues, South Africa v. Israel will achieve what no anti-colonial movement ever could: a reckoning between international law and settler colonialism, starting with Euro-America's darling in the Levant. For Euro-America and Israel, the fallout is potentially catastrophic. End of quote. In the meanwhile, Israel's Western allies arm it, fund it, and defend its genocide that continues unabated with utter impunity. An expert has told CNN that the intensity of Israel's bombing had, quote, not been seen since Vietnam, end of quote. As Israeli military and intelligence officers have admitted to Israeli media, everything is intentional in Israel's factory of mass murder in Gaza. Nearly 2 million Palestinians have been forcibly displaced, many to overcrowded, unsafe shelters. Recalling Israel's long history of mass forced displacement of Palestinians, UN expert on human rights of internally displaced persons has said that Israel's war on Gaza aims to deport the majority of the civilian population en masse, end of quote. In November, UN experts warned of an Israeli genocide in the making, having already concluded earlier that Gaza had been running out of time. As early as October 13th, prominent Israeli scholar of the Holocaust and genocide, Professor Raz Segal, described Israel's aggression in Gaza as, quote, a textbook case of genocide. Over 880 international scholars, as well as leading US, Palestinian, and other human rights organizations, have also warned of the genocide. Aside from saving Palestinian lives and livelihoods, reinforcing the primacy of international law at a time when Israel's live-streamed genocide is reducing it to tatters, as Ireland's president puts it, has never been as urgent. Expectedly, genocide denial and attacks on South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice have mainly come from colonial Western states, led by the United States. A former Portuguese Secretary of State has commented on the shameless role of the US, saying, quote, no one could accuse the US of double standards. What it is vulnerable to is the accusation that it no longer has any standards at all, end of quote. Based on the massive public record of Israel's genocidal acts and its leaders' unambiguous expressions of genocidal intent, and in light of the emerging, well-resourced facts that refute much of the propaganda desperately deployed by Israel to justify its unjustifiable genocide, the court of public opinion already sees Israel as guilty of genocide. This changes everything. Israel's genocidal acts, as South Africa has affirmed before the ICJ, must be understood, quote, within the broader context of Israel's 75-year apartheid, 56-year occupation, and 16-year siege imposed on the Gaza Strip. Indeed, Israel's settler colonial violence since 1948 has systematically and forcibly dispossessed, displaced, and fragmented the Palestinian people, deliberately denying them their internationally recognized inalienable right to self-determination and their internationally recognized right of return as refugees to their towns and villages in what is now the State of Israel, end of quote. In the same vein, senior UN human rights official Craig Mochaiber wrote days before leaving his position in October last year, quote, "This is a textbook case of genocide. The European ethno-nationalist settler colonial project in Palestine has entered its final phase toward the expedited destruction of the last remnants of indigenous Palestinian life in Palestine. What's more," he said, "the governments of the United States, the United Kingdom, and much of Europe are wholly complicit in this horrific assault. They are, in fact, actively arming the assault, providing economic and intelligence support, and giving political and diplomatic cover for Israel's atrocities," end of quote. This level of complicity, coupled with the fact that citizens of the West more or less democratically elect their government, makes it ethically obligatory for those citizens to, one, act toward ending the multifaceted state, corporate, and institutional complicity in Israel's regime of oppression, and two, offset the complicity that is beyond one's control by actively engaging in meaningful and impactful solidarity, especially in the form of BDS. And I'll explain that a bit. One may argue whether or not international solidarity is an ethical obligation. I think it is, but it's debatable. But let's agree that doing no harm, ending complicity in human rights violations, is a profound ethical obligation, particularly when one has the capacity to act to end complicity without incurring undue harm to oneself. Solidarity aside, Israel's perpetration of the world's first televised genocide provides the hegemonic West an opportunity to test a new doctrine of unaccountable, unmasked, and extreme violence against those who challenge Western powers and their interests. If Israel gets away with this, it would usher in an era of unmasked might makes right, where Israel becomes a role model for exterminating weaker nations and racialized communities worldwide. Western powers have defended Israel's right to self-defense against what they've called an unprovoked attack by Palestinian armed resistance groups. I'll address both claims in 5 points from an ethical perspective. First, in any situation of oppression, where you start the timeline of violence reveals a lot about your moral compass. As the Brazilian philosopher Paulo Freire writes, quote, "With the establishment of a relationship of oppression, violence has already begun. Never in history has violence been initiated by the oppressed. Violence is initiated by those who oppress, who exploit, who fail to recognize others as persons, not by those who are oppressed, exploited, and unrecognized," end of quote. So the reaction of the oppressed, whether one considers any aspect of it morally or legally justifiable or not, is always just that, a reaction to the initial violence of the oppressor. Understanding the context and causes of resistance does not entail accepting its specific tactics. Second, well before October 7th, Israel's far-right government, its most racist, fundamentalist, sexist, and homophobic ever, had been ruthlessly escalating its ethnic cleansing, siege, pogroms, killings, incarceration, and daily humiliation of millions of Palestinians everywhere, thinking that its unmasked brutality could force us to surrender and accept oppression as fate. Third, the South African legal team at the ICJ explicitly affirmed that according to the International Court of Justice itself and its ruling in 2004, and this is a very important point for Western audiences, Israel, as an occupying power, has no right to self-defense against Palestinians under its military occupation, according to international law. no right to self-defense against those under occupation. Moreover, the Genocide Convention does not allow for any justification to perpetrate genocidal acts. International law actually recognizes the right of all peoples to resort to armed struggle. However, the use of force against civilians is strictly prohibited. 4. Regardless of the above, condemning any illegal or immoral acts of violence that the oppressed may commit in resisting oppression in an inherently asymmetric relationship of power is acceptable if and only if the condemning party has earned the moral standing to do so by being already on record condemning the prevailing system of oppression, the initial violence. 5th, since oppression is the root cause of violence, those of us who sincerely care about ending all violence must act to end oppression. As the struggle that ended apartheid in South Africa has shown, ending this complicity in Israel's system of oppression, especially through the non-violent tactics of BDS, is the most effective form of solidarity. So what is BDS? We heard a little about it. It was formed in 2005. It is led by the absolute largest coalition in Palestinian society. It's inspired by the South African anti-apartheid struggle, as well as the US civil rights movement. But it is rooted in a very long heritage, in a century of Palestinian popular resistance. It aims at ending Israel's 75-year-old regime of settler colonialism, occupation, and apartheid, and upholding the right of refugees to return. This is an important point. Anchored in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the BDS movement categorically opposes all forms of racism, including Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. In a nutshell, BDS targets complicity, not identity. A growing number of anti-colonial Jewish Israeli BDS supporters play a significant role in the movement. And a recent poll shows that 16% of all Jewish Americans support BDS, with the percentage rising sharply for those under 40, Jewish Americans under 40. They understand that there's nothing Jewish about Israel's siege, ethnic cleansing, massacres, land theft, and apartheid. And therefore, there is nothing anti-Jewish per se in supporting BDS to end these crimes, to end settler colonialism. As tens of progressive Jewish organizations have said, conflating opposition to Israel's regime of oppression and its ideology, Zionism on the one hand, with anti-Jewish bigotry, hatred, and discrimination on the other, is an attempt to distort the definition of anti-Semitism and to weaponize it to simultaneously silence advocacy of Palestinian rights and provide Israel with impunity for its crimes. This not only harms the Palestinian liberation struggle, but also the struggle against real anti-Semitism, as they put it. Israel has celebrated its relative success in getting anti-BDS motions or declarations passed in most US state legislatures, in the German lower house of parliament, the French parliament, the British parliament, and elsewhere. But Israel is missing the growing undercurrent of resentment and apprehension that its McCarthyite tactics are creating. When the German Bundestag in 2019 accepted the fraudulent anti-Palestinian so-called IHRA definition of anti-Semitism and adopted a resolution that smears BDS as, quote, anti-Semitic, for instance, it drew strong condemnation from more than 240 Jewish and Jewish Israeli scholars, including the world's top authorities on the study of the Holocaust. Crucially, their statement accused the deceitful resolution of doing nothing to advance the urgent fight against anti-Semitism and of ignoring the BDS movement's explicit condemnation of all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism. In the US, several federal courts have frozen respective anti-BDS legislation, citing their incompatibility with the Free Speech Amendment of the US Constitution. The American Civil Liberties Union has condemned these anti-BDS motions as reminiscent of McCarthy-era loyalty oaths. The Israeli regime has since 2014 considered BDS, quote, a strategic threat, later upgraded to a strategic threat of the first order, and invested massive financial intelligence, propaganda, and diplomatic resources in fighting it. Israel has for years even dedicated a full government ministry, just imagine, to fighting BDS. As exposed in Al Jazeera's groundbreaking documentary, The Lobby, and as revealed recently in an investigative report in The Nation magazine in the US, Israel and its lobby groups in the US have spent hundreds of millions of dollars over the last few years in fighting BDS. Yet, Israel's strategy appears to be failing, as some major Israeli and Israel lobby groups have lately admitted. The European Court of Human Rights in 2020, for example, ruled unanimously that France's 2015 conviction of BDS activists violated the freedom of expression article of the European Convention on Human Rights. This confirmed a 2016 European Union position upholding the right to advocate for Palestinian rights through BDS as protected free speech. So did the governments of Sweden, Ireland, Netherlands, as well as leading international human rights organizations such as Amnesty and the International Federation for Human Rights. In the face of Israel's ongoing genocide, Palestinians are not begging the world for charity. We're calling for meaningful, impactful solidarity. But before and above both, we're demanding an end to complicity as a profound ethical obligation. In this context, BDS is now much more needed and much more effective than when it was first launched. Adhering to its nonviolent anti-racist principles, over the last 18 years, the BDS movement has built a massive network worldwide, supported by trade unions, farmers' coalitions, as well as racial, social, climate, and gender justice movements, together representing tens of millions worldwide. It has made large multinationals like G4S, Veolia, Orange, HP, the computers, not the sauce, Puma, and others totally or partially end their involvement in Israel's crimes against Palestinians. Ben & Jerry's, in 2022, removed Israel from the locations in which it does business. In 2023, the BDS movement compelled Allied Universal, the parent company of G4S, the world's largest security company, and it's British, to end all G4S business in apartheid Israel. Canadian BDS networks and trade unions played a key role in that victory. Giant sovereign funds in Norway, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, New Zealand, and elsewhere, as well as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, have divested from Israeli or international companies and banks that are implicated in Israel's occupation. Last year alone, mayors and city councils from Liège and Verviers in Belgium, Oslo in Norway, Belém in Brazil have taken decisive measures against Israeli apartheid and the companies supporting it. The proud city of Derry is going through passing an ethical procurement policy, which we are really proud of. Dock workers' unions in Belgium, Barcelona, Italy, Greece, Turkey, Oakland, California, and Durban, South Africa, have also taken actions to refuse to handle Israeli ships or arms shipments to Israel. Mainstream churches in South Africa have endorsed BDS, while major churches in the United States, all Protestant by the way, have divested from complicit companies, including Israeli banks. Tens of thousands of artists and academics have declared support for the cultural and academic boycott of Israel, which targets institutions, complicit institutions, not individuals. BDS calls for ending all those forms of complicity in Israel's regime of oppression, not just for the sake of Palestinian rights, but for humanity's sake as well. Israel, after all, sells its military security technologies and colonial doctrines as battle-tested, tested primarily on us. For instance, through the export of its weaponized spyware technologies like NSO's Pegasus. As a diplomacy tool, Israel has for decades been a culprit in war crimes and crimes against humanity, perpetrated by dictatorships, death squads, and authoritarian regimes worldwide, from Latin America to Africa to South Asia to the Arab world. So what is the BDS movement calling for right now in this time of genocide? 1, challenging, disrupting business as usual in states, institutions, and spaces through peaceful disruptions, sit-ins, walkouts, occupations, etc., targeting parliamentary buildings, policymakers' offices, not the Derry City Council, they're good, as well as the corporate enablers of genocide and apartheid, arms manufacturers, investment firms, media institutions like the BBC, universities, cultural spaces that may be complicit. This also includes organizing with trade unions to escalate peaceful disruption of arms shipments to Israel, in the UK and in the Republic of Ireland. Escalating strategic boycotts of companies that are complicit in Israeli apartheid, including banks, as well as escalating campaigns targeting companies that have proven to be complicit in the ongoing genocide. 3, convincing businesses, cultural and academic organizations to declare themselves apartheid-free zones. 4, organizing strategic and intersectional campaigns to pressure investment, pension funds and institutions, city councils, universities, churches, and so on, to adopt procurement and investment guidelines that exclude companies implicated in grave human rights violations anywhere. These guidelines can then be applied to exclude companies involved in Israel's genocide, apartheid, military occupation, and settlements. 5, and last, building broad coalitions to organize grassroots and civil society campaigns to pressure parliamentary parties or other influential actors to push governments to adopt meaningful sanctions, especially now after the ICJ decision today. And a military embargo is the top priority for Palestinians. This includes pushing transit states like Ireland, so it's not just the UK. Ireland is important in this, it's a transit state of weapons, to stop allowing the transport of weapons through their ports and airports. To conclude, UN experts, as I said earlier, have said Gaza is running out of time, warning of a genocide in the making. Actually, this modern-day ghetto of Gaza is running out of life. In this time of genocide, ending complicity, if not now, when? Ending complicity includes speaking truth to power, refusing to be silenced by corrupt or cowardly policymakers, government officials, members of parliament, corporate media, or any other figures in power who are today wielding their power to silence us, to deprive us of our agency, of our ability to articulate genocide, to resist genocide, and to stop genocide. If you hate violence, end oppression. If you hate oppression, end complicity. If you love freedom, justice, dignity, and equality for all, as we do, irrespective of identity, mobilize pressure to help us dismantle Israel's 75-year-old regime of settler colonialism and apartheid, as well as all forms of oppression. But for now, we need your full and urgent support to help us stop the genocide. In January 1969, the slogan, "You are now entering free Derry," appeared on a wall in the box site. With our struggle and with your meaningful solidarity in Ireland and across the world, we shall one day see a sign on the ancient, beautiful walls of Jerusalem. You are now entering free Palestine. Thank you.
Viva! Viva! Viva!
Thank you so much, Omar. That was a very, very powerful address, and you certainly gave people a lot of ideas as to what they can actually do. But I thought, given that, well, given first of all that we in Derry think that Derry is the centre of the universe, I want to start with the local. I mean, obviously you're talking about global situations there and global organisations and a worldwide message and a need for solidarity on a huge global scale. But just your experience of Derry itself has actually given you some insights into the difficulties of implementing BDS, hasn't it? Because you were here in 2016 and you actually got a motion passed at the City Council in Derry for BDS, but it didn't quite go according to plan. Would you tell us a bit about that and about how you've now come back and proposed something that you mentioned in your talk, which is a bit different from that?
Yes, sure. Well, the first impression is that Derry has always been very warmly welcoming Palestinians, and we deeply, deeply appreciate that. Across Ireland, but in Derry in particular, there was always this vibe, very positive vibe. So it was one of the few city councils, one of the first city councils that adopted BDS passionately. I think it was a Sinn Féin resolution at the time, and I think it was nearly unanimous. It's always nearly unanimous, for obvious reasons. But adopting a BDS resolution as a declarative step has not translated into effective policies as far as buying, procurement, investment, and so on. Because then you get into legal challenges, especially in the British system. Many of the arguments against that resolution, in our view, were fraudulent, were not convincing legal arguments, and there was a counter-argument to be said. But regardless, through our discussions with partners in Ireland, across the island, and with many activists, human rights organizations, and so on, and after consulting the European Legal Support Centre, which plays a very important role in giving legal advice, we've decided it's best to push for ethical procurement policies that do not mention Palestine or Israel. They don't have to be geographically connected, in fact. Because BDS is intersectional, it believes that Palestinian liberation is connected to other struggles for justice. Why not propose, refraining from procurement from every company involved in human rights violations, anywhere? And if that passes, as I said in my talk, then we can present the companies that are complicit in Israel's specific violations. And we think that is fault-proof. No smart British lawyer will be able to find any loophole in that, unless they say, well, protecting human rights is bad for British policy. So go ahead and say it.
We have in recent days, though, heard from, obviously in Derry, you don't want to get involved in talking about local politics, but we do have a divided sense of politics in this city and in this place, and there have been some unionist politicians who have talked about Israel being the victim of terrorism and claiming that what you're trying to put through is extremist. Can you address that? How do you deal with, as you travel the world, visiting places, local domestic politics do get involved in people's attitudes to Palestine, don't they? I come from a part of this city which occasionally flies Israeli flags, whereas in other parts of the city, Palestinian flags will be flown. How do you manoeuvre yourself around that?
I think that's very unique to the north of Ireland. I haven't seen this anywhere. And we work from Jakarta to San Francisco, from Stockholm to... I've never seen this. Associating being pro-Palestine with Irish unity, Catholicism, I understand, but associating that with being somehow something the Protestants should oppose is beyond anything I can logically think why. What is being pro-Palestinian? How can that be anti-Protestant? Because in the US, as I mentioned, the Presbyterian Church and the United Methodist Church and the United Church of Christ, several of the mainline Protestant churches were the first to adopt divestment resolutions from companies and banks involved in Israeli war crimes and human rights violations against Palestinians. So we don't see this binary between an ethnic group versus another, a religious group versus another, a national group even versus another. It's a binary between pro-justice and anti-justice. When one person in the Derry City Council opposed the ethical procurement policy proposed, which says the Derry City Council will not procure from companies involved in grave human rights violations, period. How can they justify that to themselves? How can they sleep at night peacefully, having voted against refraining from procuring from human rights violators in general? So it becomes a herd mentality type of thing, which we should oppose on any side. We should always have our rational faculty, critical thinking, ethical thinking all the time. We should never follow a herd, in my view.
You talked a lot about complicity, and this is something which has come up here in terms of attitudes, for example, to going to the US. It's a tradition in Ireland that Irish politicians go to the US and have a meeting with President Biden, the President of the United States, who is currently, of course, Joe Biden, and that he's presented with a bowl of shamrock by the Irish government. And there's a dispute going on in the north at the moment, and indeed even in Derry, about whether or not politicians should attend that meeting. Can you talk about that? I know you don't want to sort of take sides and things, but can you talk about the difficulties of defining complicity in that kind of situation?
Yes, I do not want to delve into internal Irish politics, but let's look at the issue from an ethical perspective. From a Palestinian perspective, the US government is a full partner in genocide. It's not supporting genocide, it's not complicit, it's a full partner. Arming, funding, directing, intelligent, every aspect, defending Israel with lies and fabrications, I mean, you name it. The US is a full partner in crime. So we obviously call for isolating the White House because it is facing isolation globally. At the United Nations General Assembly late last year, the US and Israel were almost totally isolated in the resolution on a ceasefire, if you recall. The absolute majority of humanity was on one side, and it was the US, Israel, and a few banana republics on the other, with all due respect to banana republics. So, on the other hand, the ICJ today decided that Israel is plausibly committing genocide. And as I said, this changes everything. It's no longer a matter of opinion, of this government or that. The Prime Minister of Ireland can say whatever he wishes, but either he doesn't know what he's talking about, or he has to retract the idiotic statements he made about genocide, because now the World Court has decided that Israel is plausibly committing genocide. And similarly, the US President is being accused, plausibly, by the Center for Constitutional Rights, by human rights organizations, of complicity in genocide. There's a court case going on right now in Oakland, California, against Joe Biden and the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense of the US for complicity in genocide. So at that time, we think further isolation of the White House is what's needed to push the Israel-US genocidal axis to actually stop the genocide. Because the ICJ ruling will not on its own force them. It's people power, it's our agency that will force them to stop. Having said that, of course we understand the importance of the US for the long project of Irish unity, reunification, and we fully understand it. But again, we have to ethically look at the harm and benefit. And from a Palestinian perspective, we see the harm outdoing the benefit.
There's been enormous demonstrations all over Ireland, North and in the Republic, and in the UK, and all over Europe in support of stopping the genocide in Gaza. Have you been surprised by the sheer volume of people who have come out?
It was, in some countries, a pleasant surprise. In Ireland, it wasn't. We expect that. not that we take the Irish for granted, but we know that your hearts are in the right place. I mean, Ireland has this unique position in Europe as far as support for Palestinians. But in a country like not pro-Palestine in any way, the government and the establishment really pro-Israel, very beholden to the US, yet the tens of thousands in every Dutch city that have demonstrated for Palestine, for ceasefire, arms embargo, and so on, has been absolutely inspiring. Similarly with Belgium, with Spain, with you name it, across the continent, we've seen very impressive. Not to mention the Global South. In the Global South, it was just amazing. I mean, million-strong demonstrations in Morocco, in Jakarta, Indonesia, across the Global South, in Cape Town, South Africa, and across Latin America, and so on. I think many people realize this intersectionality of struggles, that as one English trade unionist said in an article, when we struggle to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza to stop the genocide, throughout this process we've realized how the British government has gradually eaten away some of our trade union power, our civil rights. They've denied us some of the rights that we've taken for granted, and now with this mobilization for Gaza that we have not seen in a generation, we're realizing that we want to use that power on other issues, on our domestic issues, trade union issues, and other rights. This connection of the struggles is also helping to get those people out. An entire generation of young people, some would call them the TikTok generation, have had a crash course in politics throughout this genocide like never before. We're seeing 15-year-olds and 17-year-olds across the world, those who have never dealt with politics, coming out and making very intelligent political statements and taking the right side and defying power. Defying power. We're seeing journalists in the New York Times newsroom defying the editors and resigning when the editors forced them to censor out pro-Palestine speech. It's reaching a level of this mass defiance of the powers that be, this hegemonic power that wants to dictate to people.
Yeah, you mentioned journalists there, and you talked in your speech about very powerful work that you referenced in The Nation, and also the work that Al Jazeera has been doing in reporting from Palestine. But there has been media coverage which has displeased you a great deal, hasn't there, in terms of, for example, the BBC and other major broadcasters. Can you talk a little bit about that, given that that's how a lot of people, especially older people, receive their information about what's going on?
Yes, indeed, and thanks for this question. In Nuremberg, in the trial for Nazi war crimes, complicit media was also on trial. We were reminded of that by Craig Mohammed, the senior UN official that I quoted before he resigned. He said, media that has been complicit in whitewashing or justifying Israel's current genocide should be held to account, just like the media was held to account during Nuremberg. And this is very true. Certainly the BBC will take a very advanced number at The Hague if justice is to be achieved. And the CNNs, and the Fox News, and the New York Times, and so on. What is really astonishing, and I've lived in the West, and I've lived in Palestine, I've lived in Egypt, in our part of the world that's assumed to be mostly, Arab countries and so Global South, assumed to be authoritarian, lacking free press, and so on, we have much freer press than the Western freedom offers you. We get the full spectrum of public opinion, of views, from the State Department in Washington, to the Communist Party of China, to, I don't know, anarchist groups, God knows where, to every part of the spectrum. We hear their views, we analyze, we're critical, and you learn how to filter things. You watch Al Jazeera, you know what to filter out, what to filter in, and similarly with every other channel. But you watch the BBC or CNN, and there's a total collapse of professionalism. There's a total decline in professionalism. How can anyone consider this professional media, let alone unbiased, fair, contextualizing media. It's just poor media, very, very unprofessional. On Palestine, it's not just that, it's genocidal, it's dehumanizing, it's racist media.
And you mentioned the reception that there has been, the way that the reporting has gone today of the judgment of the International Court.
Yes, absolutely. The court read a number of provisional measures ordering Israel to stop killing Palestinians, stop harming Palestinians, allow humanitarian aid, one after the other. It confirmed the plausibility of the charge of genocide. So it has done amazing, points proving that Israel has completely lost the legal argument, but it did not explicitly call for ceasefire. All but called for ceasefire, just fell short of calling for ceasefire. And the BBC's and the New York Times, the world. So the main. Maybe you can hear me?
Hold on, we're there.
Sing us a song.
Check.
So the New York Times and several other complicit media headline the news. The ICJ rejects a ceasefire order on Israel. That's it. That's the headline. Very pro-Israel. So that type of, it's beyond bias. This is partisan propaganda. It's not media.
You talked about, the relentlessness of the genocide and the refusal to listen to. We've had the UN, very powerful figures within the UN, making very strong statements. We've had organisations like Médecins Sans Frontières making very powerful statements. We've had all kinds of organisations that could never be accused of being partisan, making very strong statements about what's happening. And so far, Israel appears to have been willing to ignore all of them. And you talked about Israel's ambition to just wipe out the Palestinian people. Do you fear that they will just carry on as they have before and deal with the consequences later?
If they do not face very serious consequences, yes, they may well continue the genocide. Because they've said it. The intent is not left for guessing. They've said it outright, explicitly. We want to exterminate the Palestinians in Gaza, or push them out to Egypt. So they made that very clear, unless they're stopped. And the fastest, most effective way to stop them is pressure on the United States and European governments, because they're the co-criminals, basically, partners in crime. And of course the British government is part of that. So we need even more people power, more pressure on governments to stop the genocide. It can be stopped, especially, I think, after the ICJ ruling earlier today, because as we were discussing at the mayor's office, it will split the European states. We think many European states will not ignore the ICJ. They cannot ignore the ICJ, the World Court, the highest authority, legal authority in the world. Because if they do, they will be condemning international law into oblivion, as per the quote I cited. And that's the end of European resort to international law. They preach to the rest of the world, oh, you have to respect human rights and international law. As a senior G7 official told the Financial Times, now when Europeans or Westerners preach to the global South about human rights, they kick us out of the room and they laugh at us. What human rights? Seriously? After Ukraine and Palestine and the utmost hypocrisy of Europe, you've lost your mask. Don't preach to us about human rights.
If there was a ceasefire immediately, or whenever there is a ceasefire, what is the scale of the need in Palestine at this point?
It is immense beyond imagination, as UN reports have said, because Israel has systematically destroyed massive parts of the tiny little Gaza Strip, which UN officials called domicide. Domicide is a crime whereby you destroy any factors that sustain life to make a part of a territory uninhabitable. Infrastructure, homes, hospitals, roads, solar panels, water pipes, everything is destroyed, so that even if there's a ceasefire and they open the internal checkpoints in Gaza, people can't go back. There's nothing to go back to. They've made it uninhabitable, basically. So that the needs are immense. But Palestinians have been for 75 years fighting, resisting oppression, and we've proven to be resilient. We don't give up because we simply cannot give up. But we need the world to stop their complicity. We're not asking for charity. We can make it happen. We can revive this. We can rebuild our lives and livelihoods despite losing tens of thousands of our loved ones, many of them children. But we need to stop the genocide first and foremost.
We talked a little earlier about the media. One of the remarkable things, like I speak as a former journalist, that to see the number of journalists who are being killed in Gaza at the moment. Can you just reflect on that for a moment?
Yes, that's one of the painful aspects of this genocide. Reporters Without Borders and other professional federations of journalists have documented not just the killing, the targeted killing, intentional killing of Palestinian journalists, who are the only ones covering the genocide, because international journalists are not allowed by Israel. And those Palestinian journalists are doing a heroic job, really. Not just putting their lives on the line, as we found out and as very well documented, Israel, with every single one of them, has threatened their families. So they threatened the reporters, if you continue to report, we shall go after your family. And indeed, this is the first armed conflict in the world where the oppressor kills families of journalists for being journalists, for doing their job. And this is very well documented. So the chief reporter of Al Jazeera had most of his family was killed in a strike, very intentionally hurt. He did not stop reporting, his family was bombed. His family home was bombed and he wasn't there. They knew he was reporting and they killed his wife and two of his children. A few weeks later, they killed his other child. So this type of vengeful criminality is proceeding without impunity. And you get the British Prime Minister and even the Irish Prime Minister, not to mention the White House, saying, oh, Israel has the right to defend itself. Like robots who have lost any sense of morality, any moral compass, and are not ashamed of being so criminally complicit.
You talked in 2021 about how at that point you felt very hopeful, you felt that there was a sea change occurring. Obviously you couldn't have anticipated the particular ferocity of what has happened in more recent times, but do you still feel, and do you particularly feel after what happened today in the International Court, that there is hope?
I mean, this is the worst time for Palestinians to have any hope, obviously. This is if there was ever a time to lose hope, it would be now, when, as I said, more than 90,000 have been killed or maimed, and with devastation and destruction continuing. Yet, we do have hope, first because we cannot lose hope, but it's not just a matter of faith, it's a matter of reading reality in a different way. Hegemonic powers, oppressive powers, all of them perfect the ability to occupy the minds of the oppressed with despair, with hopelessness. In Ireland, you know exactly what I'm talking about. They keep hitting you and hitting you and hitting you. No justice, no accountability, so that you just give up. And as I've heard from the families of the Bloody Sunday victims, after 52 years, they have not given up. They're still pursuing justice. So you know exactly what I mean. even when there's a slim chance that you see the very dim light at the end of that tunnel of injustice, you keep at it, you keep going, because you can't allow them to occupy your mind with hopelessness. They cannot colonize your mind with hopelessness. So you have to seek out every light in the world that gives you hope. So you look for it. If you don't, you just see the genocide. But a human rights activist like me, I seek out that light. I look for it. When I come to Derry, I see the light. When I meet with the city council in Derry, I see the light. When we watch the massive demonstrations across the world, we see the light. When we see hundreds of employees of the White House and the State Department in the US quitting, resigning, or disagreeing with the White House criminal genocidal policy, it gives us hope. So across the world, we're seeing so many signs of hope, of defiance, of speaking truth to power, and we know that we're not alone. This proves to us that not just that our struggle is objectively connected to all those justice struggles, people around the world are telling us, you are not alone, and that gives us hope.
I think that's an excellent moment on which to end, Omar. When I spoke with Omar earlier, he said he didn't think he was a good speaker. I think that's the only foolish thing he said this evening. Thank you so much. It's been a huge honour to talk with you this evening, and it's been a huge honour for all of us in Derry to host you here. And thank you very much to the committee for inviting Omar and inviting me to interview him tonight. Thank you so much. Can you please give me a
Thank you, everyone. We are humbled and very proud to have this presentation tonight. And I suppose there's been a number of messages we've heard about complicity, about being hopeful in the middle of this genocide and slaughter. But the fact that it is one word, one struggle, I think is important for us all in this city and beyond. So just firstly to remind people that we have a public meeting tomorrow that Omar will address, and then again we hope to drill down a bit more in terms of what Derry can do practically. We have Jewish Voice for Palestine speaking, we have Sadaka Ireland speaking, and we have Catherine Hutton from our own Derry Palestine Solidarity Campaign. So everybody welcome in this building tomorrow between 1 and 4. So just firstly to thank Susan and to point out that Susan refused to take any contribution towards the research that she'd done on this in her attendance tonight, and instead she's donated it to Palestine, so thank you very much. And also that all of you who donated or bought tickets in advance, all of that money will go to the Palestinian Medical Relief Society, and we will see that that happens. And to Omar, our friend and comrade, we would like to make a presentation of Free Derry Corner with the Palestinian colours. Free Palestine.